we know why Labour don't want to hold this review.
She finally gets a hand on the levers of power, and the first thing she does is, no, we're not going to be investigating girls being gang raped across the country. We're not doing that. Can she survive? It's a bit like Watergate. It's never the original crime that gets you, it's the covering up of the crime that gets you. Hi everybody, and welcome back to Nick Talks. This episode's returning guest is the first time this year. It's Ash, that Preston journalist. Happy New Year, Ash.
Happy New Year, Nick. You all well?
Well, I am well, and let me make this perfectly clear. You're the last person I'm going to say Happy New Year to. It's been 9 days now. I'm not doing that anymore now. Otherwise, we get to Easter and we're still wishing people Happy New Year. Let's jump into this. There's the main story at the moment has to be the grooming gang scandal and the fact that the Labour government will not hold a national review into this. What do you make of that?
It's despicable, isn't it? I know we're speculating here, but we know why Labour don't want to hold this review. Because this took place in predominantly Labour towns, Labour councils with Labour MPs, and they know how damaging this really is. There's no other reason for you to hold out so much, despite the fact the pressure is so bad now on them to hold a public inquiry. There's no other reason you would hold out on such an immoral issue. It's actually, I know it's a sick thing to say, really, given the context of the thing, but it's an easy win for them. Hold a public inquiry, get to the bottom of it. But I'm afraid some of these people in the party, namely Sir Keir Starmer, were working for the establishment at the time in the Department for Public Prosecutions. And how many police chiefs does Starmer know, or the Labour Party know? How many councillors do they know, etc.? We already know that councillors in Oldham, for example, were involved in some of this stuff, and that's a fact. And some of the police were so, maybe complicit's a strong word, but certainly didn't do anything about it, and in many ways actually helped these people to just carry on what they were doing because they were too scared of being called racist. It would look so bad on Labour that there is every chance that it could bring Starmer down, even if it was just a case of looking at how badly Starmer did when he was in the DPP, and he keeps saying it didn't come across my desk and all that. He said the same thing about Savile. I mean, did anything go across his desk when he was there? It seems that nothing's his fault.
Yeah, I'm not sure if you know, but I've been tackling child sexual exploitation for 2 decades. Um, my charity did some of this work. I did some of this work at the council, and I won a national award in 2015 doing this type of work. So I know what goes on here. You're right. Labour is scared stiff. Labour is scared stiff of what is going to happen when we finally pull the lid off this. And it's going to be the cover up. It's a bit like Watergate. It's never the original crime that gets you. It's the covering up of the crime that gets you. Because, the vast majority of Labour politicians and, civil servants, I mean, 99.9999% of them think this crime's horrendous. So it's not like they were involved or they thought it was acceptable. They didn't. But what happened was they all decided, I don't want to be called racist. And if I raise this, if I'm a whistleblower, it's going to be bad for my career. And that is what we're waiting to uncover. There's people who, like Keir Starmer, wouldn't surprise me if he quashed some of this, hence why they don't want the inquiry. But they're more stupid than we give them credit for, because the vast majority of public inquiries are hamstrung from the day they start because of the terms of reference. So he could have initiated a national investigation into this, and he could have hamstrung it on day one and left it 5 years to report. And that's what a normal politician would have done, but he didn't. He's turned around, and the optics are awful because it sounds like now he doesn't care about the victims of grooming gangs. And I'm sure he does. I'm sure they all do. But they're too stupid to play politics, and they're too stupid to understand that they could have got away with this, just like every other government in the last 30, 40 years has got away with this.
To an extent, I agree. I mean, there's definitely better ways of politics they could have played it, and you're right, they probably could have swept it under the carpet. And these inquiries, they go on for years, and by the time they're finished, nobody really, I wouldn't say they're not bothered, but the topic's certainly nowhere near as hot as it once was. And as a result, not a great deal gets done. So yeah, it gets pushed into the long grass, doesn't it? A bit like that last report we had about this. I forget the name of it now. The report where it didn't look at any of the towns or anything like that. Really, it didn't speak to any witnesses apart from one. 20 recommendations came out of that report.
J report.
The J report, that's it. And the Tory government implemented a big fat zero of those recommendations. So it just goes to show that these things do absolutely nothing, do they? But it's you're right. It is the cover up that gets them. It's not the initial crime. If at all Labour are guilty of any crimes whatsoever, I'm not saying they are, but the other things that are coming out around this now, like Labour are bringing policy papers out, for example, which are signed by Wes Streeting, and some of the wording. This was leaked today. The report policy paper that Wes Streeting has put out refers to grooming gangs as an archaic term and as a racist term. So what they're already trying to do now is change the language around this. I mean, what do they want to call them? What else can you possibly call them? So they think that, in other words, they want to shut down every bit of debate they possibly can. And I mean, to be honest with you, this party, as you rightly said, they're not good at playing politics. Starmer hasn't got a decent political brain on his head in his head anyway. But look at last night in the vote. Look at the way they sent Labour MPs out there on a three-line whip. So these people with the threat of being excommunicated, if you will, from the Labour Party, in other words, having no chance of being re-elected, although they're slim anyway at the moment. They send these people out there. 364 was it voted against with the government, and then it turns out that not just Starmer, but also Lammy, Reeves, Miliband, and Streeting all abstained, along with Keir Starmer. I mean, what does that tell you? If I was a Labour MP now, I mean, I'd never be that stupid, but if I was a Labour MP now, I would be absolutely bloody furious. I now look like an uncaring tosser who doesn't give a toss about any of these young girls who have been sexually abused, tens of thousands, possibly hundreds of thousands. I look terrible, especially, by the way, if I'm the MP for Rotherham or Telford or somewhere like that. And yet my government, my so-called leaders, all abstained. So when push comes to shove later on, they can turn round and say, "Oh well, actually, I wasn't too sure about it, so that's why I abstained." But all these other Labour MPs now have been completely chucked under the bus. It reminds me. Do you remember the Chris Pincher affair with Boris Johnson? He sent that was the guy that was watching porn in the House of Commons or something, weren't it? And Boris Johnson sent everybody out defending him, defend, defend, defend. And within a few hours of them all going out there and doing exactly what Boris said, he U-turned and sacked Chris Pincher or suspended him, whatever he did, before the by-election was called. And that's it then. They all turned on him. They said, this is absolutely ridiculous. We now look like absolute dickheads. And that's how these Labour MPs look now, because of Starmer.
I didn't realise that they'd all abstained. I just presumed they'd all voted, and I knew the numbers to vote for it was like 300 and something. I knew it was high, so I just presumed the front bench all voted for it because it's what's it called when you all do as you're told in the cabinet
Collective
responsibility.
responsibility.
No, that's the so I just presumed, but you're right. They've all got a get out of jail card now because months and years down the line they can say, "I never voted for that." But it was your government. you on the front bench.
Yeah. Imagine putting a three-line whip on them as well. I mean, if he wanted to play a bit prime ministerial, he could have turned around and said it's a free vote. We're going to do the right thing, Labour Party. We're going to let all MPs vote on their own consciences, and then see what happens. I mean, what's the worst that can happen to them? Think they're in the gutter anyway. You may as well try and do something that at least looks morally right. But they haven't even got that in them. And as you just, I was astounded myself when I found out that most of the front bench had turned around and abstained. I mean, it just beggars belief. I don't know what to say about it. It's just it's spineless. It's cowardly. And as I just said, they've thrown every single one of their MPs, many of which, by the way, have tiny majorities. We're talking a couple of hundred votes here. and have people like Reform UK hot on their heels who will now be absolutely crapping themselves because they know that when come the next general election, they're not just going to get inheritance tax thrown at them or private schools thrown at them and anything else that Labour have done to crash the economy. They're also now going to get the fact that they didn't want to investigate paedophile rape gangs.
Exactly. I mean, Keir Starmer has already been called Keir Starmer, the granny harmer. Now he's going to be known as the kiddly fiddler apologist. There's there's no way out of this for them now. I don't know how Jess Phillips can survive because Keir Starmer will be looking for, surely he'll be looking for something to save himself. And they always throw the ministers under the bus first. So do you think Jess Phillips, who's a gobby cow, I don't like her as a politician, because she spent decades talking about this stuff, decades demonizing men. It's always about men and boys who are the offenders. She reads out the names of every woman who's been killed by a man every year. She never reads out the names of men who've been killed by women. But here she has. She finally gets her hands on the levers of power. And the first thing she does is, no, we're not going to be investigating girls being gang raped across the country. We're not doing that. Can she survive?
No, she will. She will get. I would lay good money now that they're already looking for a way to get rid of her by so that they can save a bit of face and she can save a bit of face because I made a video recently, right, called Starmer's Human Shields, and I went through these ministers because that's what they are. They're not cabinet ministers. These lot are all there taking the flak for Starmer, and every time something is going wrong, what does he do? He gets on a plane and jets off to somewhere, and he leaves them to stand in Parliament giving out the bad news. When Liz Kendall made her announcement, I can't remember what it was now, it was another scandal they'd been stuck in. When she made an announcement, he jetted off somewhere across the, was it Norway or something like that? And then he sends other people out into the Commons. And last time he was in Estonia when they were giving bad news out. He sends Angela Rayner out to talk about house building, how fantastic it's going to be. House building has got declined for the last 3 months in a row. That's Rayner's fault. It's not Starmer's fault. And it's going to be exactly the same with this. It's Jess Phillips that had to speak about this in Parliament. Jess Phillips now looks like an idiot because, as you said, she spent quite a long time talking about this. But when she's got a ministerial salary and a ministerial car and all that stuff, all of a sudden she's not so keen to rock the boat. On a side note to that, by the way, where's your Me Too mob here? Where's your so-called feminists? You know, men are all bastards, that sort of thing. Where are they at the moment? You don't hear a
They've
word
been
from
quiet
them.
for decades. They've never ever discussed this because they all believe in the hierarchy of victimhood. And white girls are above white men, but Asian men and Muslims are way above white girls. So they don't want to talk about it. They've never discussed it.
No, if I walked up to Jess Phillips and tapped her on the shoulder, she'd probably say I'm sexually assaulting her. Or some of these, some of these really I'm not against feminism entirely. I'm all for equal rights and that. But some of these feminists are so militant. All you got to do is, all you got to do is breathe too loudly near them, and that's it. You've assaulted them. And all of a sudden, all these girls are being raped, and they don't give a shit. Do they? You don't see them, you don't hear from them. But I can guarantee you now, if it was I don't know, gangs of white men roaming the streets and picking girls up and drugging them and doing whatever to them, they'd soon be out on the streets then, wouldn't they?
Oh, absolutely. Now, this issue isn't going away. The lid now is firmly off the jar. Elon Musk has made it international news. We've got other countries' news channels talking about the UK, talking about how we allow the mass rape of our children. If we were a different country, our parliament would be saying we need to apply sanctions on that country because they keep raping their own children. But this is the UK now. This, I think, has got a very good chance of not only bringing down this government, but heavily damaging the Tory party, who are just as guilty. And they're using it now as an attack line on Labour when they've just come out of 14 years in power. The Tories I still despise the Tories, but this could bring down the government. I have no idea where this is going to go. If we've got some decent journalists in the country, they should be digging deep into this now because there's some scalps to be had here. If we can find out what Keir Starmer knew when he was the boss of the CPS, the Crown Prosecution Service. Anything can happen now. We're in a world now where tomorrow the government could be gone. A year from now, it could be gone. We're just waiting for that one little straw that breaks the camel's back.
Definitely. The problem is, how do we find out what Starmer knew or what he didn't know? There are people willing to whistleblow because we've seen recently Rupert Law's managed to get whistleblowers from the Home Office and things like that. So there are people willing to whistleblow on these people. Hopefully, there are enough people with a bit of moral backbone to actually do this. Um, but if there's people willing to whistleblow and tell the truth, why have they not done it yet? Why has nobody come forward yet? You're absolutely right. This is the kind of thing that could definitely bring this government down, which is, as we said at the beginning, this is the reason they don't want the inquiry in the first place, because any public inquiry, whether Labour like it or not, would have to speak to all these victims, or as many as possible. It would have to also delve into the higher ups, your police chiefs, your council chiefs, social workers, civil servants who are in charge of this sort of thing. I'm guessing that falls under the health remit. Who's in charge of all this stuff? That means chief constables again, all these senior people, senior civil servants and social workers, and then they would have to investigate also why didn't the CPS go after a lot of these people? I mean, one thing we failed to mention was Starmer's desperate line that we've seen so many times, wasn't it? Once again, if you care about young girls being raped in this country, you are jumping on the bandwagon of the far right, and that was Starmer's words. Never was such a not just a morally bankrupt statement made, but what he's managed to just annoy the entire country once again. He's now saying that if you're concerned about these girls, how they were treated, the life sentences effectively that all these girls have been given through their experiences, you're part of the far right. And that is the last line of defense for people like Starmer. They still believe that they can say far right and everybody will wince. Whereas now the phrase is used that much that I get called it all the time. Now it's just Waterford up's back. Couldn't give a toss. I wear it as a badge of honour. Call me what you like. Honest to God, and that for me was the last line of defence. We've even seen a little bit of softening on the language as well. I don't know if you heard Jess Phillips saying, "Well, there could be room for an inquiry if the victims want it." Yet they're saying the victim. What do you mean if the victims want it? Of course they want it. That Labour don't want them to have their say. They don't want them to have their day in court because then it will expose all these people, all of the establishment that ignored it and sacrificed these girls on the altar of a utopian multicultural society that doesn't exist.
Yeah. Being called far right has been the playbook for decades and decades. And they just don't realize that the playbook doesn't work anymore now. It's run out of steam. And saying that now just annoys everybody when who isn't concerned about the rape of any child, regardless of nationality, regardless of where they are in the world. Nobody can ever justify that. And I think he's just digging himself a bigger hole. Now, personally, I don't even think I want a national inquiry into this because, like I said before, it'll just be hamstrung from day one. It won't lead to anything. What we need is action. What I was going to do last year when I ran for Mayor of Greater Manchester, if I was elected, I was going to look at every report ever done in Greater Manchester. There's about a dozen of them, 15 of them. And I was going to get a group together with people like Maggie Oliver and some other people involved in this in Greater Manchester. And I was going to get them to highlight every name of every senior police officer mentioned in those reports who failed in their duty. And I was going to sack them all. And I was going to allow them to take us to court for unfair dismissal. And we'll have it out in court. We may have lost all the cases, had to pay him off, but the message would have been sent around the country that the days of not doing your duty are over because you will be sacked. You will have your reputation ruined. You might have to go to court to claim compensation of, being fired. But I don't care. I wanted action being taken, and that's what I was going to do. And if the chief constable would have said, no, we're not sacking them, the only person I can sack is the chief constable. So I would have sacked him and hired somebody who was willing to do what I wanted them to do. And I would have caused a stir that would have changed this country. And all this is wrote in my manifesto that I released last year. That's what we need. We need action. I don't want any more reports anymore, because reports take 2-3 years and cost £100 million. I wanted action, and that's what we need now, action.
I couldn't agree more. I mean, I don't know this new Chief Constable of Greater Manchester Police, but apparently he's quite old school and he has actually started to sort the place out. I don't know how true that is, by the way. This is what I hear because I don't live in
I would say at the moment he comes across as the best chief constable in the country.
not a
Now,
great deal of competition though, is there?
well, but at least he's the top of the pile. So
Yeah, I agree. Yeah.
he is old school. Police officers, he's been in charge now for 3 years. Police officers now don't wear rainbow stuff. We don't have rainbow cars anymore now. Police officers don't dance like idiots at Pride. He's done some of the changes, but he only can change what the mayor allows him to change. So I have no idea if he'd like to go further. I was going to give him a chance. And if he impressed me, he'd stay. If he didn't impress me, I'd sack him. But I would have given him a chance, because if you can take the cuffs off him, maybe he can do a lot more.
Maybe, but it's nice to see somebody actually doing something, isn't it, for a change, trying to change things. I mean, Greater Manchester Police was at rock bottom anyway, so I suppose he had a basically a clean slate to build from, didn't he? At least he's tried to do something more than Andy Burnham, I would say, has ever done for Manchester. But yes, going back to your original point, we definitely need action. But the problem is, how do you find out who to go after, or punish, or sack, or whatever it may be, or expose, if you don't look into what went on in the first place? The only way to do it, as you pointed out before, I think, would be if some really good investigative journalists got onto some of these people, got onto these civil servants, tried to find some whistleblowers inside the councils, inside the police, and to see what actually went on. Why was some paedophile able to go into, I think it was Oldham Police Station, and actually pick up one of these girls and take her back? Why were the police arresting dads who tried to get to these properties and get in there to get their daughters out, knowing what was going on, yet the police arrested the parents? These these are the people for me that need. Well, I know what I'd like to do to them, but we can't. So these are the people that need locking up. As far as I'm concerned, throw away the key, lock them up, or at least exposing so they can never live a normal life ever again. That's what I'd do to them. Like you said, if you've got to take people to court and they want their compensation for being sacked, then fine. But I'm going to make sure that everything you did, everything that you allowed to happen, comes out in that courtroom. That's what you'll have to go through to get compensation out of me.
Exactly. Exactly. We start ruining reputations. If we've got enough evidence, we lock them up, but we might not be able to find that evidence. That's why I was going to go straight to sacking people, because at least I knew I could get that done and get it done very soon, not wait 5 years for legal team to say you can lock them up. I was going to do something straight away. If there is any investigative journalists out there, you need to do your job, because this needs sorting, and you're right. And I reckon once the first person to fall will blow the lid off this, and more people will fall. I think it's a Jenga tower waiting to collapse. We just need someone to pull out that first piece, and I hope it comes soon, because this is a national shame. This is a stain on our country, and it'll be a stain for hundreds of years to come, that we allowed this to happen. And it's not just the politicians. Me and you allowed this to happen because we didn't do enough. Parents allowed this. The state allowed this. The country needs to take responsibility for this. But we do need some people, to lose their jobs and go to jail. Ash, any last words?
Yeah, I was actually going to say something controversial, actually. I was going to say what we actually need, and people might not like this, some people. I think what we need is actually someone like Tommy Robinson to come out of prison and start speaking up on this again. Because I don't care what he's inside for, he has done more to expose this scandal than anybody I can think of. And whatever you think of his past, that's up to you. EDL and all that, that's up to you. But he has done a hell of a lot to expose this, and he's paid the price for it many times by going to prison. And in my opinion only, that's why he's in prison now, because he's exposed this stuff. And he's got such a powerful voice, and he knows what he's talking about when it comes to this scandal, because he could see it happening in his hometown of Luton. And if we get a big voice like that who's willing to speak out on this, then I think that's what we need. And if that comes to peaceful protest, mass protest down the streets peacefully, then I'm all for that. Get millions marching down the streets, get some pressure on them, and make them hold an inquiry, or as you said, make them take some sort of action.
Yeah, great place to end. Cheers, Ash. Let's speak again soon.
Yeah, cheers, mate.